We tend to think of history as this grand story, written by generals, kings, and brilliant inventors. But what if the most powerful force shaping our world has been something else entirely, something invisible? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the hidden architecture of our world: finance. Seriously, think about it. We build monuments to conquerors and we celebrate creators, but we almost never talk about the financial engineers who made all of their ambitions possible in the first place. Well, that's what we're digging into here. It's about how the flow of capital doesn't just fund history, it actually designs it. And here's the absolute key to the whole thing. The real story of finance isn't actually about money, it's about risk. More specifically, it's about creating systems, institutions that allow us as a society to take on these enormous, seemingly impossible risks. Things like crossing oceans for the first time or building world-changing technology. Whoever masters the art of engineering risk, well, they hold the blueprint to the future.
So, to really see this engine in action, we need to look back at these key moments where its design was upgraded. Moments that just fundamentally changed the scale of what humanity could even dream of achieving. When you lay it out like this, you can see this incredible evolutionary line. It's amazing. Way back in the 14th century, you've got the Medici figuring out how to protect themselves when lending money to unpredictable kings. Fast forward to 1602, and the Dutch literally invent a new way to fund a global empire by spreading the risk out across the public. And today, Silicon Valley uses almost the same logic to fund technological revolutions. Each step is a level up in managing bigger, crazier forms of risk. Let's just zoom in on the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, for a second, because honestly, it's the blueprint for the modern corporate world. Before the VOC, funding a voyage was like betting on a single horse race. If the ship sank, that was it. Game over. Everybody lost their money. The absolute genius of the VOC was creating fixed capital. Your money stayed in the company, voyage after voyage, win or lose. This one idea transformed a series of wild gambles into a long-term empire-building machine. And it shows you how a financial structure could suddenly be given the power to wage war and build colonies. It was basically the privatization of national ambition. And this is where the echo through history just becomes undeniable. I mean, look at the parallels between the VOC from 400 years ago and modern venture capital. They're both designed to pool huge amounts of money for extremely risky projects. The VOC spread that risk across the public to fund ships sailing into the unknown. VCs, they spread the risk for their investors, the limited partners, across a whole portfolio of startups, knowing full well that most are going to fail. The goal is different, sure. One wanted spices and silks, the other wants market domination. But the underlying architecture for managing risk, it's almost identical. Okay, but this incredible engine of progress, it's got a dark side, a really dark side. The very foundation that this whole architecture is built on has a deep and often pretty violent flaw. Karl Marx had a really powerful way of looking at this. He argued that the origin story of capital isn't some gentle tale about saving your pennies and investing wisely. He called that a nursery tale. The real story, he said, begins with something way more brutal, a process he called primitive accumulation. So this process, it starts with something called expropriation. And you can think of this as just open robbery. It's the first step, it's direct, it's violent, it's taking land, resources, and labor through conquest, through slavery, through colonialism. This is not a fair trade, it's theft, and this act is what creates the raw materials and, crucially, the landless workforce that capital needs to even get started. Now, only after that first violent act of expropriation can this second act begin. Exploitation. This is a much more subtle, kind of concealed robbery. It's the everyday process where a worker gets paid a wage, but the actual value they create is more than what they're paid. And that difference, that little bit of extra, that's surplus value. That's profit. So the really crucial point here is that the clean, modern system of wages we have today is built on a foundation of some not-so-clean historical violence. And this tension, this clash between the nice story we tell ourselves and the messy, brutal reality, it creates a system that is just inherently unstable, one that's defined by these recurring cycles of boom and bust. So you end up with these two totally competing stories. On one hand, you have the nursery tale, right? The one that tells us wealth comes from hard work and saving. But then you look at the actual historical record, from the VOC's colonial conquests to the dispossession of native lands, and you see a reality built on force.
This is the central contradiction. And if you can wrap your head around it, you can start to understand why our financial system behaves the way it does.
And this internal tension, this fight between myth and reality, it just explodes into view during a crisis. Take the US Civil War. The government's need for money was absolute. So national debt skyrocketed from about 60-something million dollars to this number, $2.6 billion. It's staggering. To finance the war, the government had to totally re-engineer the nation's financial system, creating paper money, the greenbacks, and a national banking system. Existential threats, it turns out, force financial innovation and reveal the system's true power-driven nature.
But this re-engineering doesn't just happen in wartime. It happens in peacetime, too. It's just quieter. During the Industrial Revolution, for most companies, more than half of their assets weren't even tied up in factories or machines. It was in working capital. You know, the boring stuff, the day-to-day cash for supplies and payroll. And by providing short-term loans, banks took on that immediate risk, which freed up the industrialists to pour their money into the big stuff, the very factories that defined the era. Finance was the hidden lubricant that let the gears of industry turn faster than ever before.
Now, this engine of progress, built on this tense foundation and greased by credit, is also prone to, well, moments of collective madness. You'd think that getting burned in a market crash would make people super cautious, right? But what's fascinating is that behavioral economics shows us the opposite is true. Just being in a bubble, it doesn't matter if you win or lose, seems to rewire our brains to take on even more risk the next time around. This helps explain why speculative manias, from tulips to tech stocks, aren't glitches in the system. They're a recurring, predictable feature of its design.
All right, so all of this brings us right up to today, because the same forces of financial engineering are absolutely still at work, right now, building the architectures that will define our century. Today, the engineering just continues. You've got sovereign wealth funds, which are basically state-owned investment giants, using capital as a tool of foreign policy, a clear, modern echo of the VOC. You have policies like quantitative easing, where central banks flood financial markets with money, which has been shown to dramatically benefit asset owners and worsen wealth inequality. And then, of course, you've got crypto, a radical attempt to build a financial system completely outside of anyone's control. The architecture is constantly shifting under our feet. So after this whole journey, what's the big takeaway? It's this. It's not the amount of money in the system that matters most. It's the quality of the institutions that are channeling it. The rules, the laws, the cultural norms, that's the bedrock. And without a foundation of integrity, that powerful flow of capital is just as likely to create chaos and instability as it is to create progress. Which leaves us with a final, and I mean massive, question. For centuries, these financial architectures have evolved, often as a knee-jerk reaction to a crisis or in a raw pursuit of power. And they've shaped our societies in ways we're only just starting to fully grasp. The question for our time is, can we finally take conscious control of this process? Can we actually design financial systems that are built from the ground up to serve civilization? Or are we just destined to be the products of an architecture that we never really chose? The answer to that? Well, that's going to define everything.